Christopher Columbus was born in Genoa, a city in Italy, a very long time ago. As a young boy, he loved the sea and dreamed of becoming a great sailor. He learned how to read maps and navigate ships by watching the stars and the night sky. He believed the world was round, like a ball, which was an idea that not everyone agreed with back then. Columbus was a man of great determination, and he held on to his dream of sailing across the vast, mysterious ocean. He spent many years studying and planning, hoping one day to lead a grand expedition that would make him famous and wealthy, forever changing the maps of the world. The main reason Columbus wanted to sail west was to find a new, faster way to get to the Indies. The Indies, which included places like India, China, and Japan, were lands rich with valuable goods. Spices like pepper and cloves were worth a lot of money in Europe. Silk and gold were also highly sought after. The old way to get to these lands was by traveling east over land, a journey that was very long, dangerous, and expensive. Columbus had a bold idea. If the world was round, he could simply sail west across the Atlantic Ocean and arrive in the Indies much more quickly. He was convinced this shortcut existed and would revolutionize trade. For many years, Columbus tried to find someone to pay for his ambitious voyage. He went to the leaders of different countries asking for ships, sailors, and supplies. He first asked the king of Portugal, but the king's experts thought his calculations were wrong and said no. Undeterred, Columbus went to Spain and presented his plan to Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand. They were busy with a war at the time and made him wait for a long time. After nearly 7 years of waiting and pleading, just when Columbus was about to give up, the Queen and King finally agreed to help him. They saw the potential for great wealth and power if his journey was a success. With the support of the Spanish monarchs, Columbus was given 3 ships for his journey. The ships were not very large, especially for crossing a huge, unknown ocean. The biggest ship was the Santa Maria, which Columbus himself would command. The other 2 were smaller, faster ships called caravels. Their names were the Pinta and the Nina. These 3 small wooden vessels were prepared in the port of Palos de la Frontera in Spain. They were loaded with enough food, water, and supplies to last for many months. A crew of about 90 sailors was gathered, ready to follow Columbus on his daring quest into the vast, uncharted waters of the Atlantic. On August 3, 1492, Christopher Columbus and his crew set sail from the port of Palos. The sun shone brightly as the 3 ships, the Santa Maria, the Pinta, and the Nina, left the familiar shores of Spain behind. The sailors waved goodbye to their families, not knowing when or if they would ever see them again. The first part of their journey was to the Canary Islands, which were owned by Spain. They stopped there to make some final repairs and gather more supplies. After a short stay, they sailed west again, heading directly into the great unknown. No European sailor had ever gone so far in that direction before, and the ocean seemed to stretch on forever. As the days turned into weeks, the journey across the Atlantic Ocean became very difficult. The sailors saw nothing but water and sky in every direction. They had never been away from land for so long, and fear began to grow in their hearts. The wind that pushed their sails blew steadily to the west, which was good for their journey, but it made the men worry. They wondered how they would ever be able to sail back home against that same wind. The food became stale and the water did not taste fresh anymore. The sailors grew restless and scared, afraid they would be lost at sea forever and never reach their destination. After a month at sea, the crew became desperate. They had seen no signs of land, and many of the sailors wanted to turn back. They were tired of the endless ocean and the constant uncertainty. Some of them began to grumble and complain, thinking that Columbus had led them on a foolish and impossible quest. They threatened to mutiny, which means they would take over the ships and force Columbus to sail back to Spain. Columbus had to be a strong leader. He encouraged the men, reminding them of the riches and glory that awaited them in the Indies. He asked them to trust him for just a few more days, promising that they would find land soon. To keep the crew's hopes up, Columbus often looked for signs that land was near. He pointed out flocks of birds flying overhead and floating pieces of wood or plants in the water. These small signs gave the sailors a little bit of encouragement, making them believe that they were getting closer to their goal. Columbus also kept 2 different logs of the journey. One was a secret, accurate log of how far they had actually traveled. The other was a fake log that he showed the crew, which recorded a shorter distance. He did this to prevent them from becoming too panicked about how far they truly were from home, keeping their fears at bay just long enough to continue the voyage. After more than 2 long months at sea, just when the crew was about to lose all hope, everything changed. On the night of October 12, 1492, a lookout on the Pinta, a sailor named Rodrigo de Triana, shouted the words everyone had been waiting to hear, "Tierra, tierra," which means land, land. In the distance, under the light of the moon, they could see the faint outline of an island. The sailors were overcome with joy and relief. They cheered, prayed, and celebrated. Their long, frightening journey across the unknown ocean was finally over. They had found land, just as Columbus had promised them they would. The next morning, Columbus and a group of his men went ashore in a small boat. He was dressed in his finest clothes and carried the royal flag of Spain. When he stepped onto the sandy beach, he knelt and gave thanks to God for their safe arrival. He claimed the island for King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain, naming it San Salvador, which means Holy Savior. Columbus believed he had reached an island in the Indies, off the coast of Asia. Because of this belief, he called the native people he met there Indians. This name would stick for centuries, even though they were nowhere near India. The people who lived on the island were the Taino people. They were curious and peaceful, and they came out to meet the strange visitors who had arrived on giant canoes with wings. The Taino had never seen people like Columbus and his men before, with their pale skin, beards, and metal armor. They also had never seen swords or large ships. The Taino were generous and friendly, and they welcomed the newcomers. They traded simple things with the sailors, offering parrots, cotton, and food in exchange for glass beads, small bells, and red caps. Columbus observed their simple gold jewelry and became convinced that great riches were nearby. Columbus and his ship spent the next few months exploring the surrounding islands of the Caribbean Sea. He was still searching for the grand cities of China and Japan that he had read about, but he never found them. Instead, he sailed along the coasts of other islands, including the ones we now call Cuba and Hispaniola. On Hispaniola, the Santa Maria accidentally ran aground on a coral reef on Christmas Eve and had to be abandoned. Using the wood from the wrecked ship, Columbus's men built a small fort called La Navidad. He left about 40 men there to search for gold, and then prepared the Niña and the Pinta for the long journey back to Spain to report his incredible news. The journey back to Spain was not easy. The Niña and the Pinta were caught in several violent storms, and at times Columbus feared the ships would sink, and his great discovery would be lost to the sea forever. But they survived, and in March 1493, Columbus finally arrived back in Spain. He was greeted as a hero. He presented Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand with the things he had brought back from the new lands. He showed them strange plants, colorful parrots, and a few of the native people he had captured. He also brought small amounts of gold, which made the king and queen very excited. They were convinced that he had found a new route to great wealth. The news of Columbus's voyage spread like wildfire across Europe. It was one of the most important events of the age. His journey proved that it was possible to sail across the Atlantic Ocean and reach new lands. This opened the door for many other explorers to follow in his path. Soon, ships from Spain, Portugal, England, and other European countries were sailing west, eager to claim land and find riches. This period became known as the Age of Exploration. The world suddenly seemed much larger, and the maps had to be completely redrawn to include the two massive continents of North and South America, which Europeans had not known existed. The impact of Columbus's journey was enormous, and changed the world forever. It started something called the Columbian Exchange. This was the widespread transfer of plants, animals, culture, people, technology, and ideas between the Americas and the Old World of Europe, Asia, and Africa. From the Americas, Europe got new foods like potatoes, corn, tomatoes, and chocolate. From Europe, the Americas got horses, cattle, wheat, and sugarcane. However, this exchange also had a terrible downside. Europeans unintentionally brought diseases like smallpox to the Americas. The native people had no immunity to these illnesses, and millions of them died as a result. In summary, Christopher Columbus was a brave and determined explorer whose journey in 1492 connected two parts of the world that had been separated for thousands of years. While he did not land in the Indies as he had planned, his accidental arrival in the Americas was a turning point in history. His voyage led to centuries of exploration, conquest, and settlement that shaped the world we live in today. It created new nations and new cultures, but also led to immense suffering for the original inhabitants of the Americas. Because of this complex legacy, Columbus remains a very important and often debated figure in world history.